Back.
Thanks.
Thanks. Just to some people.
Yeah. Okay, we got to run the show here too. Well, good morning, everybody, and we intended to do this over in the House Triangle, but we had some liquid sunshine this morning, which kind of threw us for a loop. But look, this is a really important reintroduction of legislation that we think we can get some real traction for. I want to thank Gary Sauer and Shane Learman for being here and for your service to our country and Congressman Lawler. I really appreciate the opportunity to work with you on this. So many of the issues that we deal with fall into sort of conventional partisan divisions, but much more of what we do actually fits this category. This is a commitment that we both have to support our service members in every way that we can, and to keep the promise that we made to them long ago. So PFAS, the Vet PFAS Act. PFAS is a family of man-made chemicals. We've been working on this for quite some time. Used for decades in military bases and products like firefighting foam. That firefighting foam seeping into groundwater and contaminating drinking water. For years, the DoD has known that although effective, these chemicals can cause really serious health issues for anybody who's exposed, including cancer, thyroid disease, pregnancy complications. But for too long, the federal government has been too slow to act to deal with the threat posed by PFAS exposure. And so today, we know that there are more than 700 military sites with known or suspected discharge of PFAS, including 20 in my home state of Michigan. And that means that hundreds of thousands, quite literally hundreds of thousands of military personnel across the country, many of them, again, from the areas that I represent, have been exposed to these life-threatening conditions. Despite this reality, and despite the fact that this has become increasingly clear, veterans continue to face roadblocks when trying to get treatment for conditions related to PFAS exposure. So, surviving military spouses and their families have had to go through hoops after hoops to access benefits that they're entitled to, that their loved ones earn. You'll hear more about that from our guests. The reason we've come together for this legislation is that this situation is completely unacceptable. We made a promise to our veterans when they put on that uniform that we'd take care of them and we'd take care of their families when they came home. And right now, we're not making good on that promise. So that's why I'm proud to join my colleagues in introducing the Vet PFAS Act, which would finally remove the red tape and ensure that veterans and their families suffering from the consequences of PFAS exposure get the health benefits that they need. Under this bill, illnesses associated with PFAS exposure will be considered service-connected, making veterans and their families exposed to PFAS eligible for medical treatment through the VA and disability payments. There are more than 4,000 types of PFAS. We know that these chemicals are hazardous to human health, and we know a lot about the types of PFAS, but we need to learn more. There's a lot more work to be done. The Vet PFAS Act would address this in a couple of ways. First, it would provide those health benefits for veterans with the conditions that we know, based on the C8 study in West Virginia. And for those of you who have been following PFAS, that's one of the most exhaustive studies of human exposure to toxic chemicals in the history of our country. We know that those conditions as a result of the C8 study, like high cholesterol, ulcerative colitis, thyroid disease, testicular cancer, kidney cancer, pregnancy-induced hypertension, are related to PFAS exposure. But it will also require the VA to update, our legislation would require the VA to update the list of conditions based on the results of the CDC study that Congress secured in 2018 that will determine other conditions linked to PFAS exposure. The study is in its 6th year. It's expected to be completed in the next few years, and by incorporating those results, we ensure that all veterans exposed to PFAS will be provided the necessary health protections that they have earned. When a veteran is sick because of this kind of exposure, the last thing they or their family should have to go through is to fight the VA to get access to benefits that we promised them when they put that uniform on. Last Congress, we made some progress on this subject, the passage of the PACT Act, and guaranteed that for some toxic exposure, significant toxic exposure, particularly related to burn pits, those conditions will be covered. But we've got more to do, and that's why the Vet PFAS Act is necessary. Again, I just want to mention how proud I am that this is legislation that we're seeing progress on. The more people know about PFAS, the stronger the support is across the country for legislation like this. And I'm really proud that Congressman Lawler has joined as the co-lead on this, and I want to ask you to make your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Congressman Kildee, and thank you to all of you for joining us this morning to raise awareness about this important bill. As a member of the bipartisan Congressional PFAS Task Force and a staunch supporter of our veterans, I can say that the Vets PFAS Act is necessary now more than ever. Many of our brave veterans were stationed at military facilities where they were exposed to toxic PFOA and PFAS materials. The impacts of PFOA and PFAS exposure on Americans has come to light more and more in recent years, and studies have indicated that exposure to PFOA and PFAS can lead to higher chances of cancer and tumors in organs such as the liver and kidneys, as well as higher cholesterol levels, hypertension, thyroid disease, and more. With PFOA and PFAS contamination reported at over 700 American bases worldwide, veterans and their families are disproportionately impacted. In the same way that Congress passed the PACT Act to provide critical care to veterans impacted by burn pits, so should Congress pass the Vets PFAS Act. Our veterans have sacrificed so much in order to protect our freedoms. We must honor that sacrifice and provide them the care they deserve when they return home. PFOA and PFAS exposure can lead to significant health challenges for our veterans and should be treated seriously. The Vets PFAS Act does just that, making PFAS and PFOA exposure a service-connected disability, ensuring that veterans and their families are eligible for disability payments and medical treatment through the VA. Today, we are joined by Gary Sauer, a veteran struggling following exposure to PFOAs and PFAS, and by Shane Learman from Disabled American Veterans. They will be sharing their own stories on this issue, and I hope that each and every member of Congress listens carefully to what they have to say. We must never stop fighting for our veterans, fighting for funding for our veterans, and fighting for proper care for our veterans. And I'm proud to be working in a bipartisan way with Congressman Kildee to accomplish that. And I'll just note, coming from the state of New York, we've made significant changes in law in recent years to tackle the PFOA and PFAS contamination in our drinking water, in our well water, and we should. And we have also taken actions on other contaminants that are in our water. And I know in Michigan, the same. So we have seen action on the state level to combat the PFAS and PFOA contaminants in our water. And we need to do more on the federal level, not only to combat that, but in this instance, help our veterans. If it's good enough for our residents to make changes, we certainly should be making changes to support our veterans. So I'm proud to be here today.
Thank you, Mike. Mike and I are proud to stand together to try to make sure that the United States government keeps its promise to those veterans who are willing to stand up for us when we need them most. Their voices are the most important ones. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Gary and to Shane to make their comments, and then we'll take whatever questions you may have.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Congressman Kildee, Congressman Lawler, honorable members of Congress, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Congressman Kildee, for taking lead on this very important legislation and inviting me here today. It is truly an honor and privilege to stand before you today to represent all those veterans, dependents, and surviving family members of those veterans that have already passed, all of which have been afflicted by toxic exposure while serving their country on a military base, either closed or currently open. These bills are a critical first step toward addressing the healthcare needs of our veterans, their family members, and whose lives have been forever changed due to the exposure of these forever chemicals found both in the water and soil of the very installations they lived and served on. This is a bipartisan issue, and it's about doing the harder right instead of the easier wrong. By taking care of those who have preserved our nation and have granted us the privilege to stand here in front of you today to announce this legislation to help our sick veterans and their families. I proudly served my country for 22 years as an infantry officer in a variety of light, airborne, and mechanized units, both CONUS and overseas. I took an oath upon the plains of West Point 44 years ago to defend my nation and to give my life if called to do so. None of us at that day took an oath to give our lives after service due to toxic exposure on the installations we served and trained or subject our family members to the same. I am proud of my service, and I would continue to do so if called upon today. I became aware of my condition about 5 years ago during an annual physical at Walter Reed Army Hospital. Until then, I pretty much enjoyed a very healthy lifestyle, actively involved in playing, officiating, and coaching sports at a variety of different levels. Due to the initial findings in my blood and the results of the testing that showed no genetic mutations predisposing me to this disease, I began to wonder, somehow, was I exposed to some toxin during my service when there was no family history of disease? After months of research, my brother, also a colonel, sent me an article of my first duty assignment at Fort Ord, California. The installation upon closure was declared a Superfund site by the Environmental Protection Agency, where concentrations of numerous toxins were found in the aquifers of providing the drinking water to the entire community. PFAS was one of those toxins, and it measured about 8 times above what then the EPA had established as an acceptable limit. Today, recently, the EPA has actually changed that acceptable level to a more restrictive standard. As I became more familiar with the Camp Lejeune situation and the widespread contamination among military installations, I discovered of the hundreds of affected military installations identified by the Department of Defense, I had been already stationed at 10 of them, and either permanent or temporary duty, of which the PFAS contaminated sites were in the water that I drank every day. As of today, I completed 1 year of chemotherapy, a year of immunotherapy in the pandemic era, and then continue my last year of immunotherapy. I'm not the same person that I was, and I am immunocompromised, and my life has been changed forever. My non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is not curable, but fortunately it is treatable. And this lymphoma has a direct impact on major organs within your body. It so chose my kidney. And due to the current law and procedures, my conditions, like many others who have been exposed to these toxins, are not eligible for care or disability from the VA, as this exposure is not acknowledged as service-connected illness. As an exposed veteran living with a non-curable cancer, many others who served at many others who had served at Fort Ord and around the world, I cannot emphasize to you enough how important and meaningful this legislation is to veterans that have been exposed to these toxins, and the positive impact that it's going to have on their lives, their family members, and those survivors of those veterans that have already passed. It will enable them to have testing, care, and disability available to them. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I encourage all members of Congress to support this legislation, because affected veterans reside in every district within our nation and deserve the care and recognition for their untiring and faithful service to their nation. Thank you.
Shane?
Good morning. I'm Shane Lerman, Deputy National Legislative Director for DAV, disabled American veterans. On behalf of DAV's more than 1 million members, we strongly support the Vet PFAS Act, and we thank Representative Kildee and Representative Lawler for this legislation. Representative Kildee has been a staunch advocate for veterans and families exposed to PFAS. The men and women who stand up to serve this nation make a promise to be faithful, a commitment to defend our freedom, and an oath to do whatever it takes. When our service ends, this commitment must be reciprocated by our government. We must be ensured that they will take care of our diseases related to our toxic exposures. We should trust the promise they made to us. However, after nearly a decade and the Department of Defense even confirming that these toxins are in the water supplies of more than 700 military installations, VA still does not concede PFAS exposure, nor does VA provide presumptive benefits or health care specific to those exposed to these forever chemicals. For 25 years, I have been a VA accredited DAV benefits advocate, and I have witnessed the many denials and appeals and suffering our members face trying to get benefits or health care through the VA based on their PFAS exposure. The Vet PFAS Act will keep the promise made by our government. It removes barriers to service-connected benefits and provides access to VA healthcare. Historically, it has taken many decades for VA to recognize and establish presumptive diseases for toxic exposures, Agent Orange, burn pits, radiation. It's taken decades for them to recognize those. Problem is, the men and women who have been exposed to PFAS, they're running out of time. We can't wait any longer. C. Northcote Parkinson said, delay is the deadliest form of denial. We must take action now. We must encourage everyone to support the Vet PFAS Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. Shane made a point that I just want to reemphasize, and I will say this, a bit of a personal aspect of this. I'm just going through my own cancer journey. And I know that time and stress are no friend of a patient dealing with a difficult diagnosis. And the notion that in the 21st century, with all we know about how dangerous these chemicals can be, all the research that's been done and is still underway, there's no excuse for the fact that we put our veterans, the people who have, to whom we have the greatest obligation to provide this sort of care, put them through more time. The progression of disease continues over time, and more stress is just completely inexcusable. The fact that we made progress with the PACT Act, as Mike has mentioned, means that Congress recognizes the obligation. What we're simply saying with this legislation is let's finish that job. So with that, Mike, anything to say before we, any questions? We're happy to take questions or stick around and take one-on-one questions. All right. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.